Well, good evening, everyone. Hey, that was pretty good. Let's try it one more time. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Excellent. Welcome to what I know is going to be a truly fascinating and very timely conversation about democracy in the balance. Now, you know, Wisconsin in early March isn't your typical getaway from the extremes of winter, but it's foggy but kind of warm out there. And we're thrilled that Andy Lack has come to us from New York City, where they've had as many blizzards and thunderstorms as we have, maybe more. So let's please give Andy Lack a very warm Wisconsin welcome. We're in a moment when confidence in major institutions seems to be at historic lows, and when foundational institutions, including higher education, high-quality journalism, and democracy itself, can feel pretty fragile. These institutions partly derive their strength from public trust and confidence. That, in turn, relies on a healthy civic ecosystem, one in which citizens generally believe that democratic institutions are reliable and accountable and serving the public good. But when people retreat into echo chambers, reinforcing their own beliefs, they lose the opportunity to engage in productive conversation, in reflections including across differences, and they lose the ability to negotiate or compromise or even see their fellow citizens as decent humans. And yet all of that is probably essential to a functioning democracy. And so we're in a moment where public trust and confidence in our democratic systems is diminished in worrying ways. For me, as a chancellor of a university, I believe that universities are part of this ecosystem, and that one of the things that we need to do is to double down on helping our students and our faculty and staff learn to engage with each other productively and respectfully, even when they do have differences. Yes, we need some fundamental notions of respect and the dignity of all humans. You know, we can have some shared starting points, but we need to be able to talk to each other even when we don't all see the world in the same way. Not because that will help us create some magical consensus. We don't even want to be a monoculture, but rather because campuses must be places where people are challenged in ways that sometimes change their minds and sometimes just sharpen their best arguments for the views they already had. We also believe that this can partly be taught. No one is necessarily born knowing how to communicate with each other or across differences. It's a muscle that we can help to build and strengthen. And that's part of why we've created the Wisconsin Exchange here at UW-Madison. It's designed to build opportunities to discuss and sometimes to disagree about important issues with care, and to help carry those habits of engagement well beyond our campus. Tonight's conversation is a part of that effort. I want to thank the School of Journalism and Mass Communication for preparing students not only for careers in media, but for the civic responsibilities that come from being, in part, custodians of the public trust. A particular thanks to the fabulous Professor Katie Culver for her leadership of that top-ranked school. And she's got a proud set of connections to the school as well. She, her husband, and two of her children are all proud alums of the school as well. We're also grateful to the school's Board of Visitors and alums, including Ali Zelenko, who helped make this conversation possible. Thank you, Ali. And we are just delighted to welcome tonight's honored guest, Andy Lack. Andy's storied career in the media has encompassed top leadership roles at NBC News, MSNBC, Bloomberg, and Sony Music Entertainment. He's won 10 Emmy Awards and 2 Peabodys, and did acclaimed work on 60 Minutes and other top news shows. He's overseen coverage in moments of national crisis and political upheaval, and he's founded a network of nonprofit, nonpartisan newsrooms called Deep South Today in some of the nation's most challenging news deserts. And I just got to hear about a new PBS show that he's been working on that connects very much to the issues I've just been mentioning. Throughout his long career, he's been clear about one core principle. The press must help safeguard democracy, not just be a spectator to it. How that happens is one of the topics for tonight's discussion. And so now please join me in one more warm welcome to Katie Culver and Andy Lack.
Thank you so much, Chancellor. I really appreciate it. I will say I've got some of my students in the room. They just finished an exam. I'm not sure they think I'm so fabulous. Andy, we are delighted to welcome you to the University of Wisconsin-Madison, the solid gold crown of public higher education. And the School of Journalism and Mass Communication, the jewel in that crown. Yep.
Absolutely.
All right. I want to thank, in addition to Allie, who, by the way, if you need a truth teller in your life, it is Allie Zelenko. I can always trust her to give me the straight talk, and it's been helpful throughout my career, way back to when she was an undergrad and I was an academic advisor. I'd also like to thank the folks in the School of Journalism and Mass Communication and the Chancellor's Office who made this event possible. We are very, very happy to have Andy with us. So,
thank you.
We're going to start out big.
Easy question, please. Give me a softball.
Yeah, that's what I'm known
Let's get
for.
going.
Remember the students in the exam? That's what I'm known for. Okay, so you were a big network guy. Like, you were in the biggest of big, 60 Minutes, NBC News. Why the passion for local news? Where does it come from? You were at the top of the ladder. Why have you gone to the Deep South?
Well, I think some of you may remember Tip O'Neill when he was Speaker of the House. All news is local. That was his line. And that always animated my thinking about news in general. But I went to the Deep South because that's where my family roots are. My great-grandfather came through New York from Germany and Poland in the mid part of the 19th century, a familiar wave of Jewish immigration. And where is it warm? And that's where he wanted to go. He was a peddler. And he ended up in Greenville, Mississippi, in the Mississippi Delta, the poorest city now and the poorest state in the country. So I thought everything, all the benefits of a great education came from him. And I thought I wanted to give back somehow to a place that needed what brought him to America. So I started in Mississippi. That's why I ended up in Greenville, wanting to do something in journalism, which I knew something about in the South. The South, as many of you probably know, is a news desert in some parts of each state, particularly. Mississippi is particularly challenged in that regard. So we decided, some colleagues of mine and I, we've got to get going and give Deep South Today a shot. First Mississippi Today. Now we're in Louisiana and going to Arkansas as well. But essentially, it was, for me, I had the gift of a lot of good work in mainstream legacy media, what we call today. And I wanted to give back to my roots, my family roots.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you a lot of questions, tough questions, but I also wanted to let folks in the audience know that we'd like to take your questions as well. So the wonderful Jamie Prey will be walking around occasionally as we're talking, and she's got some note cards and some pen for you, and she'll pass them up to me. We'll have a healthy time for your Q&A at the end, because
Good.
I'll just stop talking.
Yeah,
that'll be the important part. So we're here today as part of the Wisconsin Exchange, a program that I'm deeply proud of as a citizen of this university. It's got big goals, putting pluralism into practice at a time when we are more polarized than ever. We like to do small, easy to accomplish things at UW-Madison. But when you think about pluralism in polarized times, what's journalism's role in this? I'm pretty comfortable with my role as an educator and my students' roles, but what's journalism's role here?
Well, it hasn't changed from the time the founders decided the First Amendment ought to have a free press. The role is to be honest brokers of information, to tell the story, whatever that story is, fair, factually, focus on the facts, facts first, facts matter. We can get into the details of that, but at the end of the day, it's pretty straightforward. Journalism is about getting the story right. What are the facts? What is the truth around those facts? What really happened? If you can answer those three questions clearly, you're a good journalist.
So I like to tell my students that we speak about truth and getting the facts right, and sometimes I think we're a little too shorthand with that. We can talk about whether it's raining as a fact. Is it raining right now or not raining right now? You and I can agree. We can look outside. We can both see it, and we can agree that it's not raining. I think where we stumble and where we argue is more about, yes, it's raining now. How hard is it raining? What caused the rain? Who's most affected by the rain? Are we doing enough to protect people in the rain? So is truth actually possible when we have different perceptions of those kinds of issues, when it goes beyond facts into who's affected and how?
Well, I'm in the TV game, so usually you've got some pictures to make your case and some video to make your case. But the basis for disagreement about what the facts really are, generally speaking, you can make an argument, a case, with data, with proof, evidence, that supports why you think, as a journalist, you're presenting the story accurately. Fairness, that's more complicated. But I think fairness comes with this territory. And I think that's where a room full of journalists may disagree. But editors of the work that really matters, where the truth is tested, you can find it together. You can write, report. Look, particularly you're circling around the word truth. You give the best available evidence you can for the truth in that moment that you're presenting your story. May it shift? Yeah. Look through history. You see a lot of shifts. But that's the job.
Today, in the main, where is journalism going right when it comes to promoting pluralism, to getting us to consider other opinions, to respect even that with which we disagree?
You want the names of news organizations? I think you're doing that.
Well, NBC
Anybody
News.
got any suggestions?
Yeah. Deep South Today. But no, I mean, what are the things that we're doing that are good, that are promoting this role that you claim for journalism within a democracy?
Well, I think I'll start with local news, really. I think there are a lot of good examples in Madison, Wisconsin. There are good examples. I visited with the Daily Cardinal today. They asked me some unpleasant questions, I thought. Anybody from the Daily Cardinal here tonight? No, they were good journalists.
Raise them higher, be proud.
I'm teasing. I'm teasing about that. They were tough, straightforward, asked good questions. What are the facts? What do you know? Tell me why you think that. Tell me why you believe that. Give me the evidence for that. So it really starts at the community level, that buy-in to what good journalism is in your community. And you may disagree about what the weather forecast is, but weather is part of the prediction mode. You may disagree about the teams, the sports. There are a lot of arguments to be made about what animates local news, but all of the journalism that I care about deeply starts there. It starts with, which is the PBS show that the Chancellor mentioned that I'm involved with. It starts with, who is my neighbor? That was the guiding line that the man who originally had this idea back in 1989 at CBS, and the series, this will be near and dear to your heart, was called Ethics in America. So that is the frame in which you start with asking a question around who is my neighbor and what do I owe them? That was what the producer, Fred Friendly, dictated was the reason he wanted to make a show that we now call Breaking the Deadlock, because the the moment that we're in, there's a lot of tension around what is the truth? What are the facts? Show me, tell me what really happened. Prove it to me as best as you can. I'm not going to take your word for it, but I am going to listen carefully to what you're telling me, reporting to me, and what you're showing me. And you may notice in a lot of particularly national publications, if you read any of them, it's a team effort. You'll see 2, 3, 4 reporters whose byline is on any particular story. And the reason for that is check, double check, stay, keep asking, keep interviewing until you're sure you've got it before you publish. Now, there are deadlines in journalism, and you make clear to your audience, to your reader, to your viewer, this is the best available truth around this set of issues or issue that we can provide tonight. And that's still a good business to be in.
So that's all very positive. That's where we're going right. But I think probably the more important question is, where does journalism go wrong? What are the problems that we need to solve today within the mainstream news business?
Well,
beyond
I was
the
hoping the
business of
audience
news.
would raise their hand and take that question and tell me, because, you know, like is so true of politics, cultures in different communities. People see things differently, and it's just that word. They view something, hear something, read something, and may come to very different conclusions about that story, whatever it may be. And you've got to air those differences, and you've got to fight your way through, and it is sometimes a fight, but not a fist fight, a good fight. Let's figure this out together. And can you do it civilly? Yeah, you can. The biggest, really, to get to the bottom of, I think, where your question was going, is the world for journalism has changed in a digital media, social media environment that we all live in now. It's a different ecosystem than anything in my lifetime I expected. But here we are. And the fundamentals still guide most journalists who are at work in this new world order. I was reading in the Wall Street Journal recently, Peggy Noonan, a columnist who may not be a favorite of most people in this room, but in this particular instance, I thought she made a good point, which was simply, we have to understand with journalism that we've got to get past what the craft and talent that's involved and really try to see what the problem is. And sometimes in this time where the balance of democracy is part of what the chancellor was referring to, it's almost patriotic to try and talk to each other in a hard time for each other and take it as a responsibility to each other that we can do better with each other. And I think the founders envisioned that. And that on our 250th anniversary, understanding that compromise is not a dirty word. It is a tough word to deal with, and it requires work. But I think it's been demonized a bit in ways that I don't think, as a country, we envisioned that we would be in this situation. And I think a lot of that's due to social media, but I think we're fighting our way through it.
Yes, I agree, due to social media, but has compromise been vilified in part because power has been glorified? You seem to be giving up some power if you say, all right, I'm going to move off of my firmly held position and toward compromise with someone else. Is it a concentration of power that is causing part of this problem?
It's a good question. As a journalist, I always thought power corrupts. Many of us are in business to make sure we can, if we can, find that corruption and root it out and expose it. That's really the hardest work of journalists, is to take that responsibility, to hold power to account. it's not a popular position often in some places, in some communities, and it's certainly not in different areas of our lives. But that is the job. It hasn't changed in 250 years. And I think Franklin and Jefferson particularly understood that when they were writing these amendments in the Constitution. And it's held up. It's held up pretty well.
So at points in your career, you've been working in journalism when trust in all institutions was high, including journalism. We are clearly not in that moment right now. How did we get here? How did we get to this cratering trust, and do you have any ideas for how we get out?
I would beg to differ with your premise on, I think it wasn't that easy when I was coming of age as a young adult after the Vietnam War and questioning in the country how young folks felt about what was happening in the country and who was doing what to whom. We were rioting in the streets, and it was a tough time. I just think you remind me that Walter Cronkite, when I first went to CBS, does anybody still familiar with that name? Cronkite, thank you very much, said, notably, I want to make sure I quote him accurately, that the consequences and the controversy around journalism and the truth, we have to take that on every day as journalists. And he was taking it on in the 1960s in the context of that quote. And freedom of the press required us to think about what that meant. Now, 75, 80, 100 years ago, it goes back to all of those moments. So this is a tough time, but I don't think it's much different from a lot of other tougher times that we faced. And I find myself looking back and reading history with that in mind. And I think if you do, you'll see the fights and the meanness and the struggles over who said what to whom and why, and whether they really said it or not. And there weren't cameras all around often to record it. It's a little easier now to check that. And you see that every night on whatever you're watching. If you're watching television or streaming, you can see evidence of it on legacy media in particular that I follow. CNN, shows, networks like that, globally, as we march in to the Middle East in another war.
So let's get to the question. I just love that you mentioned ethics in America, and that's a throwback to my age. I guess that's maybe a clue to how old I am, in addition to the gray hair. But and perhaps I can get Barry Weiss to resurrect it and hire me to do it. But let's take that case of where CBS is now, and the appointment of Barry Weiss, and the idea that we ought to bring more conservative voices into mainstream journalism, where you lived your life, your professional career. Is the elephant in the room that the news business is liberally slanted? Is it too liberal? Or as I posed the question to Allie earlier, is the problem that journalists are liberal, or is the problem that the news is constantly confronting us with ways that we need to change?
I think we should ask Allie that question. Allie, no, I'm teasing.
She'll give you a straight answer, I'll tell you. Look, if I walk into the average newsroom, demand to know how people voted, if they voted, some journalists feel it is their ethical obligation not to vote. But come on, they'd skew to the left, probably center left, but left, right?
I actually am one of those journalists who didn't vote most of the time. And Ben Bradley, any of you know who that is? So I was lucky enough, I joke about this, but Ben was a mentor to me. And I think, though none of us knew this, he had about 100 of us he was mentoring, because he was that kind of figure for young journalists growing up in the era post-Watergate. And he didn't vote. And I thought when I learned that from him, oh, well, I'm not going to vote anymore. It was that simple to me. Because he said, frankly, it just made it easier for me to do my job. I didn't want that conceit around, well, you vote Republican, or we know you're a liberal, you're a Democrat. No, I'm not. I try to see the story through a lens that a journalist would take, and yep, you may think that, but not so. And in my case, I found it liberating in that regard. I think my more progressive liberal friends were uncomfortable that I was, dare I say the word, centrist in my outlook about the work. And Republicans thought, he's a crazy liberal communist Jew most of the time. They would say that. And I didn't take offense to it. It was, if you're doing your job right, frankly, that comes with the territory. And I never worried about that. I think you just try hard every day to play it honestly and openly and transparently. Some days you get it right, some days you don't. If you're involved with large news organizations, it's hard. You know, you got 50 people in the room. 5 of them are not going to be really helpful to what you're trying to do. It's just, wouldn't you all agree with that, basically? So I think we have in this country some great newspapers still doing great work, great network, television, cable, and lots of digital first news operations that are doing great work. And if they're not doing great work, frankly, they don't get much support over time. There is a whole new world of influencers in the digital space. And I'm not sure how I feel about it, to be honest, what that means. I'd be keen to know what this audience, do they follow influencers in their digital lives? They may not want to touch this at this point. But
Okay, throw up your. I follow sourdough bread baking influencers, that's for sure. But how many of you would say your daily information consumption routine includes social media influencers?
how many of them are conservative? All right. I think we know the answer.
Well, I mean, you're in Dane County, but you know, it was very interesting actually. Right after Donald Trump was elected for the first time, there are a couple of fascinating things that happened. One, I had an appearance 3 days later at the Madison Senior Center, and you do not want to be in a room full of older liberals and progressives after Donald Trump has been elected, because they thought it was journalism's fault and they wanted heads on a platter, and there I was. But there was an interesting presentation here by Charlie Sykes, longtime Wisconsin conservative who then went on to become a never Trumper and founder of the Bulwark. And he had a room full of about, I don't know, 200-300 people right after the election, and he said, you know, put your hand in the air if you voted for Donald Trump, and no hands went up. Put your hand in the air if you know somebody in this community who voted for Donald Trump. And of course, every hand in the room went up. So it's what are we willing to say? And I know more of you follow influencers than you're saying. But I think that one important question for us now, you know, when you're in the morning meeting at NBC News, and I've had the pleasure of sitting in, thanks to Allie, there's discussion and debate about ethics, about what we ought to be covering, why, what harms are going to come from it. What kinds of ethics attach to news influencers? So not, you know, people who drink cosmetics or fashion or sourdough bread, but, you know, Jessica Yellen from News Not Noise. What ethics ought to attach to that? The same? Do we hold them to the same expectations?
I don't have a guidebook for that. I don't spend a lot of time on social media, but I think you have to make your own determinations about that. You have to you have to, I assume, left, right, center, you're reading an influencer who you trust, whose opinion, at least if you don't agree with it, you think it comes with some well-informed judgment around it. And so what I love about the digital space and social media is the freedom. This is my son calling me saying, Dad, are you on stage? Something? Excuse me for that.
Ask him what influencers he follows.
Yeah. Gosh, this doesn't want to go off.
There we go.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. It happens in classrooms every single day.
I cover politics and government a fair bit over a lifetime, but I stay out of trying to make judgments about why people choose certain choices when it comes to the information that they get. Who do they trust? Where do they get their information from? I'm interested in finding out, but I don't judge it. One of the things that I think is helpful has been for me as a journalist is I judge the clarity of the work, the importance of the storytelling. Do we have the right people? Do we have the right characters? Am I interested in what this is? Do I see something that I feel is worthy of my time and important in that regard? But I don't judge it in ways like, oh, I don't agree with this. I don't know why we put that person in. That person's not credible to me. Sometimes you can say that because you can see from what they said that there are questions around their veracity in a particular context. But most of the time I try to, and I think it's the journalist's role to try, that's what objective to me means, to try to bring, I'm just hearing this and reading this as best as I can for the first time. That's hard, but I'm looking for the impact that it will have on me and the audience we serve in whatever the publication is or the program is. And by impact, I mean engagement. Engagement is the metric in terms of how I read how well I'm doing with an audience. Are they engaged? They may not be the largest number of people in the room, but they're engaged in ways that I think are thoughtful. And I like thinking about thoughtfulness and ethics and that part of what surrounds our work as journalists in all of the places I've been lucky enough to work in.
So let's get to the topic of discussion across difference. So, we hold polarized views. You mentioned that the poorest community in the poorest state in Mississippi.
In the country, yeah.
Excuse me, poorest state in the country.
Yeah.
What are some of the really thorny issues that are facing the communities that you cover? And what does Deep South Today do to promote that discussion across those differences? What's dividing people and how are you addressing it?
That's a good question. So it's not surprising how it breaks down. I think one of the most challenging is healthcare. Mississippi is a state that doesn't believe we need any federal dollars, even though we're the poorest state in the country, to support Medicaid expansion or Medicare expansion. That's a challenge. We work on that story a fair bit. And if you travel in the Delta or you travel in some of the poorest areas of the capital city, Jackson, you see it. Actually, today we were talking about Jackson having the poorest drinking water in the country, well known for that sad fact. How come it doesn't get fixed? One of the challenges is the city doesn't have a good relationship with the state legislature, where the capital is. In your capital city, imagine you couldn't drink the water here and the capital's up the street. The mayor doesn't get along with the governor. And you start to break that down. And you start to understand why. Why aren't they able to solve this problem together? And then you try to get people engaged in making sure that you push them to try to solve the problem. And therein lies the rub in a lot of states. And therein lies where I see, particularly in the Deep South, not enough information to share to get people to try to talk to each other across what we would call the aisle. It's hard to get that conversation together, much harder than I thought it would be over time. We've been at it for 10 years in Mississippi.
Have you made progress? Is the water getting better?
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And it was a big issue in the last couple of mayoral campaigns. And again, where journalists come into play, you assign a team of reporters to that issue, and they pound away at it, and ultimately you get some success. We talked about this today in a couple of classes, some folks who had done their homework about Mississippi Today, that Mississippi was the last state in the country to bring down the Confederate flag that flew over the Capitol, and that was a symbol for many, particularly black folks, of a racist view of the state they lived in. And it took black athletes, one or two influential legislators, and in our case, Mississippi Today, focusing on what we called, and we stole it from a previous publication that once did this in Mississippi, a hall of shame, where we put all of the legislators' faces up every day and how they were voting on various different pieces of legislation, and ultimately how they voted on whether the flag should come down. And it took us a couple of years before finally we got to a legislature that pulled that flag down. And it was black athletes who walked, because this is so much about culture in the state, and sports is everything in Mississippi, part of their culture, but it's true in college towns, as you know, here in Madison. It's part of the culture that when they walked into the state capitol with hundreds of people behind them, the legislators literally that day went, okay, we're bringing the flag down.
Interesting.
So it was, as a journalist, that's how to keep score. Keep counting the vote, keep putting in front of the state, what are we going to do about this? And if the answer is, and it was 4 years, not this year, no, we're not doing anything about it. And then South Carolina pulls their flag down and Mississippi ends up being the last. We thought, we'll get there eventually. But it's a long, hard trip, particularly in legislatures where they're polarized. They're supermajorities, whether it's Democrat or Republican. Those supermajorities make it really difficult to operate.
So let's turn to your PBS series, Breaking the Deadlock. And for those of you who haven't seen it, I highly recommend. But it sets up hypothetical situations and brings in recognizable people to play roles and get through some discussion of pretty thorny issues. What are some of the surprising things you've learned from your involvement with that series?
Well, the audience likes it. They really want to see people, in some cases, people who they know of, if they don't know literally or figuratively. They want to see people disagree with each other. They want to see, you referenced this, Chancellor, in your opening remarks. They're not afraid of that. They don't mind locking horns with each other. But they wanted to, at the end of the day, be respectful to each other, even affectionate with each other, and laugh about how difficult it is. So we put this show in front of a live audience. And the audience laughs, along with panelists that relieve some of the tension, the underlying tension, because it is a tense confrontation. We cast it so that, and they know it, they're going to be sitting down with people who completely disagree with you, whatever the subject may be. And a moderator who is a lawyer, not a journalist, asks both sides to face each other and talk about it. Now they're cast because they're not afraid to talk about it, but they get into spirited corners with each other, and there's a lot of head rolling and eye rolling, and the audience loves it for that reason. But you come away with a deeper understanding of how we can talk to each other, or want to talk to each other, but don't quite have the forums to do it. And I think here in Wisconsin, particularly in Madison, there are forums to do it, and you're pushing that. I think it's a responsibility, actually, of all of us. And we're lucky in America that we can do that openly with each other in public forums and without fear. And public broadcasting, which is having a little difficulty with its budgets these days. Public media, nonprofit media, is an important element in this journalism discussion. But I like the for-profit crowd that I've met here too, and I was impressed with that.
So share some of the topics that have been covered on Breaking the Deadlock.
Well, the first story was an election day story. The next one on the 250th is going to be an election day story. But it was basically around a book many of you may have heard of if you didn't read it, called How to Steal an Election. And it was a hypothetical, effectively, that showed the complexity of what goes on in a state legislature, and in the news business pieces of it, and in the community, folks who come at on election day with different agendas and wanting different things out of what they may vote on, and a fear that their vote won't count. So we're coming back to that in this next episode. But we talked about this a little bit with students here today. Sports gambling and gambling in general. Prediction markets, you all know what prediction markets are, I'm sure. Well, there's some heads nodding, but we did executive power.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right to Die?
Not yet.
Not yet, that's coming up, that's right.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna get on what I like to call Katie's rocket ship to Honest Planet. And I'll tell you that in watching the the episode on Truth, was it Truth Under Fire? I
Yes.
think it was. I have to say, I started it, and then I stopped it, because I was like, why do they have on that person?
Oh, yeah. Ann Coulter, you mean?
Well, I was going to say, I'm not going to say as Ann Coulter, but as Ann Coulter.
Got a problem with Ann Coulter?
And I did pick it back up. I
Yeah.
paused and I was like,
Yeah.
well, Katie, you got to live up to this thing that you promote, and you actually have to give this a fair shot. And I'm glad I did. I think ultimately the hour was
Good.
very well spent.
Thank you.
But what was it in me that did that? Where did that urge come from, and what does it say about whether we should be optimistic about our collective abilities to change our minds, or be open even if we're not
Well,
gonna
you were
change?
not alone in your view of this. I think we have to be willing to really listen to people we disagree with. Even, you could say, in many cases, and Coulter has certainly faced this, they're lying. They're not telling the truth. They don't want to recognize the truth. That's what's going on here, and I'm not going to pay attention to that. And I understand that. That's perfectly valid. I have a different view of it as a journalist. I think we need to hear each other and even confront what we believe and know, arguably, is a lie, but face into it and talk about it. And in the case of that episode, and we have this as almost recurring now in most of our episodes, the audience gets involved too, and they either laugh or they go, you know, they get a reaction. And the panel, but that's part of what we do as neighbors, co-workers, how we, I mean, it's so familiar now, particularly in the age of Trump. Well, I don't want to talk about politics with you. I can't talk about politics. Your anecdote about who raises their hand earlier. But my role through that is to walk down the middle of this aisle and get as many people as I can to talk to each other. And I enjoy that. Some of them don't, but most do. And it's not that I don't have my own opinion about some of these things, and I certainly don't broadcast certain people who are over my line. That line can move for different people. But I respect that you may not like MS Now, and you may like Fox News, or you may hate Fox News and like MS or CNN if you look at those three cable channels. And I'm sure I'm feeling Fox has got some challenges in this room, but it is what it is from my perspective. And I don't disagree with those who dislike it. I understand why they do. But I live in a world in which I think we need to deal with that.
Well, honoring pluralism in practice, you and I can agree to disagree on whether Ann Coulter is over the line, but I will say that I was really surprised by the founder of Moms for Liberty and how much her take helped me understand. We will forever disagree on the interpretation of the religion clauses of the First Amendment and the expression clauses of the First Amendment. However, listening to her did help hone my arguments because I came to understand her interpretation in a different way that, you know, kind of the shorthand of social media didn't give me in the past. So I was really grateful for that. I wasn't grateful for Ann. I'll just be. That's the rocket ship to Honest Planet, right?
That's I really like a good feedback. No joy in saying this to you, but Ann was one of the most popular people in that episode in the research.
Yeah, I bet.
That followed.
She certainly grabs your attention.
Yeah, so but and honestly, that is part of it. You're quite right. She does grab your attention in that regard, and that becomes part of the conversation. We could all agree some of that needs to be edited one way or the other. In some instances, I believe to put it out there. And work with it.
I think it comes down to a very fundamental concern that I have, which is that conflict as a value in news is part of our problem. When I said, where do we go wrong, are focused on conflict rather than on common solutions and progress can be a really, really big ethical challenge. So speaking of ethics, and then I promise I'm going to turn to your questions and stop talking. But I'm the ethics geek, and so I'm gonna wrap up my portion with a really tough question, which is I think at the core of ethics is self-reflection. So when it comes to ethics in journalism, what's a decision you made that you'd like to have back?
Well, I didn't think enough or do enough about the thoughts that I did have over time, doing stories about the military in this country and understanding the meaning of the word patriotism to those who have served and how often they feel alienated from those who haven't served, for whatever reasons. And I promised myself I wouldn't do that. I made a documentary early on at CBS that was I think at one time the title of it was, I'm not sure I remember what we landed on, but a legacy of lies in terms of the body count of the losses of life for soldiers who went to Vietnam, and their families, and how they struggled with their sons and daughters when they came home from Vietnam, if they lived through that experience, and how they were treated by their neighbors, and what they saw on the news that hurt them. And I wished that I had done more on that story, and over the years I saw, looking back, that I didn't. And I'm not happy about that. Because I was thinking actually about this is why it may have really struck me just now. I watched on CNN at 10 o'clock last night the biographies of the 4, or maybe it was 5 or 6 men, 1 woman, I think, in the group that had died in Iran in the last couple of days, this 5 or 6 day war now, and who they were, and their families talking about who their children that they had lost were. And there's a bigger story almost in each one of those, and how they ended up where they ended up, and how they're viewed now, often with no names. I think it's a big part of American life that I felt as a journalist when I was watching this last night, and I have thought about it over the years. Why didn't I get at that more, underneath that? Because right now I feel that particularly in play, or have for the last 7 or 8 years. What is patriotism? You know, what are our values around that part of our country? There's so much, particularly if you work in the, as I do, in the deep red states. I think a lot of complexity around that. And I feel badly about it, but that's
Thank
what I
you.
wished I'd done more of, a lot more of.
Clearly deeply held feelings.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Okay, and hi Jamie. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm grateful that you all did your homework. I might not get to all of them, but I am grateful to you. Okay. This is a great one. What obligations do media institutions have to ensure their leaders uphold equitable, safe workplace standards?
Oh, huge. The answer is, that's a big story if they're not. Please share with me the employer you may have in mind, whoever offered that question. Because I think it's important, though, the standards have to be not just recognized, they have to be followed.
And you see that as an ethical obligation?
Yeah, for sure.
You just gave me kind of a duh. But often,
But if you didn't think it was
often we think of ethics as the individual level. So we think about it as the choices that we make. We don't often talk about it at the institutional level. And to go back to what we were saying earlier, we were talking about kind of liberal bias in news. I think there are whole truckloads of media scholars who would say, well, actually, not at all. That doesn't bear out. That corporate influence sends us in the opposite direction, or people are so conscious of their own biases that they overcorrect. And so is there an institutional obligation to make sure that people are safe in the workplace?
Yes.
Full stop.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would feel I wasn't doing my job if a if that question were raised to me as an issue for someone employed in the organization I was working in, and they were not, I would take that. This is a complicated, larger question. I have always tended to be ready to challenge any rule, but I like following the rules because I think they do have an order to them if they're properly laid out for any community. We need that, I think, because a lot of fights get started if there's no agreement about what the law is or what the rules are. So I'm quite serious about enforcing them. And if there's a law that isn't working, changing it.
All right. How can we improve the depth of economic reporting?
You don't watch CNBC?
Sometimes not so much reporting there, right? Sometimes
No,
it's
God,
it's
I'd get
talking
myself in a whole lot of trouble if I thought there was not enough reporting there. Bloomberg? And none of you watch Bloomberg.
How about at the local level? How much do you have? I mean, you have limited staff. You have limited budget, limited
Yeah.
staff for Deep South today.
Yeah.
Are you able to cover the complexity of the economic situation in the poorest communities, in the poorest state in the country? I mean, isn't ultimately the drinking water partly an economic question?
Of course, yeah. No, not enough is the short answer. But we're getting bigger and bigger, and we have enough reporters now to do it. But I don't think we've done it with enough effort. I think, for some folks, the economic questions, you personalized it, which is great. But for the most part, they don't really want to talk about, or they're not looking necessarily for, in their morning read or in their evening news, complexity around economic issues, financial issues. But I do think we are all familiar with this word. In 26, that thesis around the word affordability is taking on a whole new life of its own. And it's humanized in ways that I think are great for all of us.
Okay, this is a great one. As movements to unionize continue to affect media and entertainment industries, what do you see as the future labor model for news media?
Whew. Well, we're unionized, the nonprofit. We're among few of them. Most are not, but we did, and respectfully so. And some of my colleagues in other larger news organizations, nonprofit news organizations, have. I respect unions' rights and the people who work for you to decide whether they want a union or not. So I don't have an issue with that, to unionize or to not unionize, depending on the environment you're operating in and the workplace that you're managing. I faced this at NBC and had the same view of it. And and I've belonged to unions myself, the Writers Guild, the Directors Guild, coming of age as a young journalist. So it's thorny for folks, but you work through it. And I think there are some populations that go, we don't want a union, we don't need a union. And they prevail if they're in larger numbers than the crowd that wants it.
Okay, this is an essay question, but I'm going to treat it like a pop quiz. All right.
Uh-oh.
So never in recent history have the nation's largest media outlets been willing to buckle to the government's, especially the president's, wishes. Examples include recent changes at the Washington Post and Skydance Paramount takeover of CBS. Card turns over, and Warner Brothers Discovery forthcoming. Please elaborate on the apparent shift in corporate dominance over journalistic values at a time when we need strong journalistic enterprises more than ever. Thank you.
All right, stand up, whoever asked that question. Okay. In general, in principle, I believe devoutly in the independence of the journalism in all of these organizations. And where that's threatened, I'm not happy about it. When you're not in the organization, you don't really know the realities of what's going on. I did know with my former colleagues at 60 Minutes that there was a mistake that was made by Barry, who I don't know at all, and but I respect because I think she's a very interesting journalist, and Free Press was a very interesting paper. So there are stutter steps in this challenge. There are difficulties with bosses. I've had a lot of bosses in these big organizations, and every once in a while when I've thought a boss was interfering with the editorial process in a way that I thought was unfair. Corporate, there's difference. Barry, in fact, is an editor-in-chief, not a corporate boss at CBS.
But brought in by the new corporate ownership.
Yes,
Yeah.
but somebody's got to hire those people. I was always brought in by corporate ownership because that's, and I did have to
Who were
report
your
up.
owners when you were at NBC? Comcast?
No, General Electric. Yeah,
General
Comcast second hitch,
Okay.
General Electric the first. And I had the notorious Jack Welch, who was, I say notorious because he was known as, what was his, Nuclear Jack, something like that? Neutron Jack.
Doing the neutron
Yeah,
dance.
firing people right
Yep.
and left. I didn't experience that with him at all. In fact, I really admired him and liked working for him. But there's always a tension between your boss in corporate and your work as a journalist. And it's messy. But if anyone really interfered with the editorial process that I was working by corporate, I'd quit, as you see some do, if you couldn't get relief, because they have a right to that independence. But I don't see it right now I hear a lot of talk about it, but I think it's going to work its way through.
And I think it ties back to a point that we touched on earlier about why we're less inclined to compromise, and the concern being about the concentration of power and the concentration of money in journalism. I think ultimately, that as people are expressing like, whoa, this latest deal now means CNN is under the same umbrella as the same corporate umbrella as CBS, and maybe most importantly, TikTok, getting back to your earlier social media point.
I think those are fair concerns. We'll see.
Yeah. All right, I'm sorry that we have time for only one more question after I assigned you homework, but I encourage you all to please stick around and ask Andy individually if I didn't get to you. But this is a great one. To what extent does the branding of journalists themselves affect the news? Should journalists be celebrities?
Oh, God. Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I would say that's been a long-running conversation first. And the most famous journalist in the world that I grew up in was a man named Edward R. Murrow. You know that name. Mm-hmm. And Edward R. Murrow famously decided to do a program called Person to Person. And among the compelling, important figures for journalists, he interviewed Marilyn Monroe, for example, as often as he could, my understanding was. And Person to Person was seen as a lightweight People magazine of the year, and what was Edward R. Murrow really identified as one of the heroes of journalism during the McCarthy era, doing a show like that. I never got the chance to ask Ed that personally. He was long departed, but it comes with this territory, celebrity and fame. And I have to say, I've dealt with many of them at CBS and NBC over the years, and I've never really seen it as a disadvantage, ultimately. All of the great reporters and anchors that I worked with cared deeply about the integrity of the work and fought for great journalism. Did they like the fame they had? And particularly when you were negotiating their contracts? Oh, they were very pleased with it. Did they like getting the best table in the restaurant whenever they seemed to show up for a tough table to get or a good seat in the theater? Yeah, they got it, and oh, shucks, it just, you know. I don't really like to sit in this best seat in the house. They never said that, you know. That comes with the territory. They were successful. And they got to do shows that they liked that were not serious journalism, but got good ratings. And the audiences admired them for doing it, and it didn't dilute their importance as serious journalists. But there were plenty of people always around them who said, you shouldn't be doing that. And they would go, yeah, understand that. And they would, and that, there's a long tradition of that. So I don't want to go into any more names, but the evidence is there. So.
Okay, well, in our
Comes with the
reception
territory.
after, I'm going to try to get you to spill some tea. That's going to, let's name names.
There's one last note on that point. If you put a camera on someone, particularly me in television, they end up over a 20-year period not being exactly the same person they were as a journalist when they started. The camera, Dan Rather wrote a book called The Camera Doesn't Blink. But at a certain point, that transcends your life. You become a well-known figure and you're admired. And that is really the essence of fame and celebrity in our country. That admiration, and people want your autograph. People want you. What you can't do, to be serious about it for one last second, is you can't say, well, I eat Cheerios, please buy Cheerios. You can't endorse products. You can't take positions that financially are in your interest. You can't take sponsors on. And there have been instances where well-known people whose names also won't be mentioned have done that privately and had to get, addressed with them. So it just comes with the territory. You know, fame and fortune, they're linked. Anyway, that's my brief.
Now I want to know if Anderson Cooper supports Wheaties. That's my question, because he looks pretty fit. Well, please join me in thanking both Andy and the Wisconsin Exchange and Chancellor Mnuchin for having us tonight.
Thanks very much. Thank you very much.
And thank you to all of you for your participation in our wonderful pluralistic society that we have here at UW-Madison. It's worth your open-mindedness.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Thank you so much.
And now, as my kids say, we party.
Great.